Hello, everyone. Let's begin the next very interesting step in risk analysis and risk management, which is assessment of risk. So, what we will do in assessment of risk, why it is important to assess the risk. So, in the last sessions, we have seen, the first step in risk management is identifying the risk and categorizing the risk. Right? So, after identifying, categorizing, and after seeing some examples in supply risk, we have observed that the probability of or the occurrence of any risky event can be different, and so is their impact. So, in such situation, right, which risks companies should uh, address? Should they address all the risky events? Can they address all the risky events? Is there any way out we can prioritize the risk? Now, if we want to prioritize the risk, we really want to have some basis. So, whether to prioritize the risk maybe in the on the basis of what is the loss, the risky event which results in a bigger loss, the loss to a company, the loss to a supply chain, or which disrupts the complete production or all the activities that result in shutdown. So these are the questions like one has to address while assessing the risk. So we would do uh, assess the risk, analyze the degree of risk associated with each risky event and hazards, right? Uh, or when we say risky events, we are saying the odds, right, the known odds, or we can say hazard, right? So it is the idea is the adverse events, right, the unacceptable or unwanted adverse events, we that would result in some loss, right? So our goal is to indicate which areas and activities in an organization or value chain or supply chain are most susceptible to hazards or this adverse adverse events. So we have already seen the risk is defined as occurrence, chance of occurrence or probability, and the impact, right? So this risk analysis will help us, or we need a scheme which would help us to find how the stakeholders would be affected. So effect can be in terms of financial terms, or as we have seen in the past examples, that it can be in terms of loss of customer or a loss of reputation. So how we want to account for impact. Okay, we will do that. And we want to do this exercise, so that uh, we can address the risk by adopting right mitigation strategy. That is only possible if we will be able to analyze and assess the risk properly, right? So there can be a risky event which is completely unavoidable. Okay, so and there can be risky events which are operational, which are under control, but this is only possible if we will be able to assess the risk, if we will be able to assess the impact of any risky event, right? So what risk assessment, this is the broad goal of risk assessment, so that can I prioritize the risk based on its occurrence and impact both. So, what risk assessment results in? The outcome will be to build a risk register, right, where one can list the causes of each risky event, right, the source of each risky event, or we can say the driver of risky event and impact of each risk identified. So, for that, we need the likelihood of that risky event or the probability of the occurrence of that event and the controls that exist to deal with that risk. So we will see the assessment of the consequences of this of the risky event. The risk assessment can be done in two ways. There can be a qualitative aspect, there can be a quantitative aspect. So what do we mean by qualitative aspect of risk assessment? So, in qualitative, as the word says, it can be of subjective nature, right? So what do we mean by subjective in nature? when uh, when an organization has to assess the risk, there can be many stakeholders, or there can be a team, like which is formed by cross functional employees in an organization, which are responsible for assessing the risk. Okay, so when this people from diverse functional area would come forward, or the different stakeholders in an organization would like to assess the risk, they all might have different opinions, right? Some of them might be more comfortable with the uh, assessing the risk in linguistic terms, right? Some might be more comfortable in setting up, like, analyzing the past data, and they might be comfortable in assigning some score, some value to the risky event. So, or like, there can be two persons perceiving the same risk differently. So, that all results in subjectivity. So, based on, the company's requirement, one can go for either qualitative risk assessment or quantitative risk assessment, but this has to be assessed based on the expert opinion here, right? And definitely one more important aspect one has to make note of is that the risk assessment is company specific, or one can say it is industry specific. Okay, for example, when we will talk about a banking industry, for banking industry, for them, the financial risks are more predominant. Okay, so operational risk might not carry the same weightage as a financial risk. For example, credit risk, default risk, so those risks can be more prominent. And recently in such sector, the cyber attacks, like, or information technology related risk can be the new kind of risk which they must understand. However, when we talk about manufacturing organizations, there, most of the chunk of cost is lying in uh, procured materials, raw materials for them. Supply related risk, or like input side related risk, can be huge. So depending on the industry, it is very important. One has to keep in mind, the industry for which the risk assessment is carried out. The same thing we can see in healthcare sector. The safety, the norms, the regulation has to be followed as per the guidelines of a particular country. So those risky things, which can, like, result in patient safety, can be more given more weightage than the other risk in that industry. So based on the industry, one can assess the risk, keeping in mind, the type of industry and the severity of risk, that industry or that company is exposed to. So we really want to rank, different risky events or hazard, so that we can identify and locate the highest risk activities. Okay, so we will see that once we would assess the risk, many a times it is uh, difficult to avoid risky event, right? Or it is unavoidable for any risky event to occur or to face. So but in that case, one has to analyze whether that event will result in some losses, or what is its impact. Okay, it might happen that the frequency of any event is very low, means it might happen once in 10 years, but if it would occur, it can result in major loss or major disruption, right? So one can analyze all such things by having a proper risk assessment. Okay, so when we say subjective or qualitative risk assessment, it involves some subjective terms assigned to probability or frequency of occurrence. We can say that an event is very frequent, it occurs frequently, or it is unlikely to occur. Okay, or it is likely to occur. So we can, if we have to give some kind of scale, to incorporate the probability, or the chance of occurrence, we can say that it is very likely the event can occur, or it is very unlikely the event could occur. So, or we can say that the chance of this event to occur is low, medium, high, or very low, low, medium, high, very high. Right. So, but the most important thing is this is just a scale, but how we define the scale, one can see that, that whether the chance of this is, so it can be taken from the past history, like, if it has happened once in 1 year, that means it is more frequent. If it is happening once in 2 years, it is less frequent. So likewise, based on, the brainstorming within an organization, one can arrive how to assign this linguistic terms to the probability or occurrence. Similarly, the effect in terms of aggregate loss or severity, right? So the impact can be again, termed as low, medium, high. So one can attach the financial impact, like, probably you perceive that, the loss will be some few hundred thousand monetary units, then it is medium. If it is beyond that, it is high. Or it can be in terms like, for service sector, one can say whether this disruptive situation would result in loss of jobs, like, by people. If only 50 will lose the job, it is not very high. If it is 50 to 100 people have to leave the job. So I'm just giving an example, like, how the impact can be weighed here, like, to for the risk assessment. So the basic idea is what is the impact, right? Impact can also be in terms of whether there would be negligible impact, risky event has occurred, but probably I have already stocked up the goods and material. So this risk event has occurred for 2 days, but because I already stocked up the goods, I'm not impacted. So it can be negligible, but at the same time, that event can result in catastrophic impact. So, based on that, one can develop scales for the impact, right? And then, we need a risk map which categorize various risky events or adverse events or hazards into various overall risk level, like low, medium, and high. So we will see that how risk map is occurred. So we have seen that, by assessment of risk, we will be able to rank the risk. We can prioritize the risks, and then we can result in how we can spend our efforts, energies, or some kind of risk mitigation strategies toward which risk. Okay, so it would be done by having some kind of risk heat maps that we will see how to form. So we have already discussed, like, why subjective assessment, right? Because, again, every industry can have different priority for the risk and its impact. But it is very important and very interesting, to see the power law of impacts versus likelihood. So, what is this power law of impacts versus likelihood, right? So, this is the power law. It actually helps see the pattern of increasing destructive magnitude, or maybe the adverse impact, and decreasing likelihood. What does this mean? We have increasing destructive magnitude and decreasing likelihood. So, in a way, it is said that uh, as the chance of any event, the chance of occurrence of every event is lesser, right? It results in, a very high impact or more severe impact, right? What do we see here? So it has been done, the research was carried out to see that the number of earthquakes happens in any average year of this magnitude, right? So magnitude of earthquake represents, the severity of or the impact of risky event, that is earthquake. So each factor of multiplication of the seriousness of the event. So here the seriousness is magnitude of the earthquake comes with significant decrease in the likelihood of events. What do we mean by decrease in likelihood events, right? So you see here, on an average, on an average of year, like on an average of 1 year, we could see that there are 1300 earthquakes with a magnitude of 5 to 5.9. They are strong earthquake, but uh, it can cause little damage. The destruction is not very severe, right? But the category true. So 134 of the total number of earthquakes which one can see in an year, they are in the range of 6 to 6.9, right? So which is now 1/10 as likely to occur. Now you see here, almost this is 1/10 the likelihood, the chance of occurrence of this magnitude uh, earthquake is 1/10 of what they are occurring in 5 to 5.9. They are likely to occur as a category 1 risk, right? So you can see that, but they have 32 times the destructive energy of that of category 1. So likelihood is decreasing, right? The likelihood of this event is decreasing, but the magnitude is increasing, right? So you can see that 32 times. The similar pattern can be seen, that the number of earthquakes on an average, they are just 15, that is like 15, but the impact is very high. So very high impact of 7 to 7.9. See here again, this is 1/10 of the category 2, 1/10 of as likely to occur as the category 2, but this is again 32 times as destructive as category 2. So this is a power law distribution, right? We will see that similar thing applies, like or this power law distribution applies while assessing the risk. We have seen that there would be only 10 to 20% of risky events, like where the chances of that event to occur is just 10 to 20%, but if they would occur, they can result in major disaster, or it can severely affect the company. So basically, what we are trying to do in risk assessment, we would like to come up with some kind of matrix which can relate our level of risk with the likelihood of risk, right? So that we can achieve all the objectives of assessing a risk, right? So what is the other utility? So for the time being, we can ignore what is happening, but what are these, that we can say that based on the risk assessment in terms of likelihood and the level of risk, we can suggest the right risk mitigation strategy, right? This slide is shown here, like to tell you the utility of risk assessment. What is the right strategy if I would face this level of risk with this impact? Okay, so this is very important. This risk assessment is very important, because eventually we would like to come up with this kind of matrix. First of all, we will create this matrix to assess the risk, right? And then we would try to come up with some risk mitigation strategies, which we can confidently say that if level of risk is high, right, the impact of risk is high and the likelihood is also high, so what risk mitigation strategy we can adopt. Okay, so this is just a small example of mitigation strategies. We can hold on, we will talk about mitigation strategies little later, but this is to show you the utility of having risk matrix or risk assessment in place. So the other interesting thing, how we can assess the risk is with the help of risk heat maps. So what are this risk heat map? one can actually use the scale, like like probability or likelihood scale, probability and likelihood of any risky event or any hazard or any adverse event. So whether the chances of that risky event is rare to almost certain, right, on one axis. Another can be what is the impact, is it catastrophic or negligible. Okay, so generally what happens, one can take, first we have already identified the risk, we have categorized the risk, we will take risk and we will try to see in this risk heat map where we can position it, right? For example, the COVID-19, one can say that it was possible risk, like COVID-19, because we know that 1 in 100, there is a possibility that some pandemic would occur, right? Because so 100 years back, we have Spanish flu. So now COVID-19 has occurred, probable, but when it has occurred, this is catastrophic. So based on that, can I position this risk in the extreme zone? So once one have build this risk heat map, we will see that this up top right corner is the extreme risk, which is catastrophic, and the probability. And next to that is like orange color is very high, right? We will just give an overall measure to the risky events, whatever, or whatever risk we have identified. We are trying to give some subjective assessment, right? Whether that risk is extreme risk, very high risk, high, medium, low. So all this risk, like by incorporating the likelihood and the impact, can we position them? So that would be really like one can really see that how many risk types are, like probably the first risk is lying here, second risk which you have identified, it might eventually falls in this category, third category of risk might fall here, so fourth can also fall here. So likewise, this risk heat map will help us to know how many risk types are lying in this extreme red zone, how many are lying in orange zone, yellow zone, or green zone. So once I know, it will help in first prioritizing the risk, right? I might like to address the risk in a red zone, or maybe I would say that green risks are not, like impacting much, they are not that severe, so can I ignore for the time being? So but this all depends on companies strategies, what they want to adopt. But this is very handy to assess the risk, so that one can assign the overall level to the risk. So this is called the risk heat map. I would also like to bring, the third dimension, right? These days, as risk is evolving, risk assessment is evolving, there is a third dimension, in the risk. So one can, we already know impact and the probability. The third thing is, like how quickly we will be able to detect that the risky event is going to occur. That is called detectability, the third dimension of risk. This is very useful, because many a times, like we don't realize the risky event has already occurred, and we delay in detecting the risk, or one can say we delay in responding to the risk, right? In the case of wafer fabrication facility, where a world renowned wafer fabrication facility was caught up in fire, which was supplying to buyer 1 and buyer 2. Buyer 1 was really proactive. Buyer 1 immediately contacted the supplier, started talking to them, about alternate facilities or alternate design, because that supplier was the sole supplier for these two buyers. However, buyer 2 couldn't respond. Buyer 2 couldn't anticipate, the severity of this risk, and it just kept quiet, and buyer 2 was waiting for the supplier to revamp their facilities, right? So we see here, the detectability. Buyer 1 was quick in detecting, there is a sensing that there is some problem, and then detecting, and then you can start. So what is detectability? the time between knowing that disruptive event will take place and its first impact. So if it is short, so if it is short, it is better for organization. Whether it is long, it can be negative also. If we are really proactive, it can be negative also. So detection before the impact is positive. Realization, right, has the at the instance of occurrence, or detection after disruption has taken place. So yeah, so this is like, it would impact. So the negative is that, when we would fail to detect, when the disruption has already taken place. Okay, so it depends on how we would incorporate. The positive detection is we are able to detect before it has happened. The shorter it is, better it is, right? So quickly if we can detect, or it can be perceived as like, if we would have a good time, to react to the risky situation. However, it is negative, please pay attention here. Detection after the disruption has taken place, that means, the loss has already happened, and we couldn't do much, and the disruption has already caused the losses, right? Or it will be zero, realization at the instant of occurrence. Okay, so this is, many risk assessment tools these days, they incorporate the detectability also, right? So like at what point of time we could detect the risk, right? So if we can detect, for example, these days, we have, advanced meteorological department alerts, so we can detect, like, well in advance. So if it is long, if we can if we will have good time to react to this situation, we can prepare well. However, if it is really short, there is a we cannot so we couldn't uh, react, to the situation, like, it is really short, we won't be able to prepare much, we won't be able to react to the situation much. But there can be situation where it's negative. Now negative means, like, we couldn't detect, the disruption has already occurred and loss has already been faced. So that's why, like, because the risk, when we talk about complete risk analysis, it is very important to be proactive. It is very important to sense, that there is going to be a risky event, or there is a risky event, right? And it helps to know that what mitigation plans we have in place, how quickly we can uh, react to the risky event. So in that terms, this detectability dimension can be used, right, in terms of how quickly you would detect. That means how much duration you have to 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 analyze or to understand that risky event is going to happen. So the time between knowing that a disrupted event will take place and the first impact, right? So this is this so now this third dimension, just like, here we can actually bring, the third dimension also, detectability. Like, if this is extreme risk, we can also say that, like, whether the detectability is short, right, or it is long. Do we have enough time before knowing the uh, had we known the risky event would occur and its impact? Okay, so many a times, natural disasters, we know it would occur, but we don't know the impact, right? So many a times these days we might have, long duration, like, detectability is really good, positive, right? But so that would help us to plan our resources on time, right? So, what are the quantitative assessment of risk? So, the quantitative assessment, just like qualitative assessment, we have seen it involves probability and its impact. In quantitative assessment of risk, we would mostly multiply the probability of occurrence with the financial impact. So, this is how we quantify the risk, by multiplying the probability of occurrence into financial impact. For example, if we are able to find out the the probability of risky event, right? We have already know discussed that these risks is mostly the known odds. Like unknown odds are called uncertainty. So known odds means I have some idea there's a 15% of chance that a delivery of supplied product, for example a brake assembly unit, right, if it would be delayed, right, so one can say that it is the delay of delivery would hamper the production of brakes assembly and hence can result in loss of let's say Indian rupee of 2 lakh, right? 2 lakh means 0.2 million of Indian rupees. What would be the estimated impact due to risk in delay? So we will say that because there is a probability involved, the chance is 15%. That's why we would say the expected impact. The expected impact is the probability or chance of occurrence of event multiplying the impact, the loss. So the expected impact is Indian rupees 30,000. So this is how the perspective of quantitative assessment of risk can be quantified. But one can definitely debate whether assigning value to the scale in qualitative is still a subjective measure or it is a quantitative measure. But if we will see from the lens of quantitative assessment, we can actually define the same linguistic terms which we have seen in subjective assessment or qualitative assessment. This can be assigned values, okay, but this values has to be assigned by, like having some categorization in our mind, right? So for the assessment of risk in quantitative manner, one can assign the values to the probability or chance of occurrence and also assign values to the consequences of impact, right? So for example, this side is consequences and this is the probability. So there is just 0 to 10 probability, means that means this is a less probability of an event to occur, very unlikely, right? And we can actually have the categories like 0 to 10 probability or more than 90%, very likely, that means these are very frequent activity. We can assign value of 5, right? Now we can also assign the values to the impact, right? So if it is very low, impact is very low, we will assign value of 1, or if the impact is very high, we will assign value of 5. But how we can define them? Very low, maybe we can say that if delay duration is more, it would be more impactful, it would result in more loss as the delay of supply product keeps on increasing. Up to 1 week, I'm saying very low, but if delay of any supply product happens more than 14 weeks, then this impact is very high, right? So assigned value is 5. And now what this quantitative assessment says that when we talk about a particular risk, we would see that what is the probability of that risk, what value we can assign, and what is the impact of that risky event, that means assigned value to the impact, and we would multiply to get the score. Okay, so this one can do that. For example, theft of valuable goods from a truck while the truck is on the way to ship the goods, right? So the probability of such event to occur is, let's say, 15%, is unlikely, right? So we are saying event is unlikely, right? So that means it's very unlikely, right? The probability of such event is very unlikely, but the impact was very high. So impact was very high. So this is very unlikely. So this is the probability of such event is very unlikely, right? And the impact is very high. So the we will give the risk severity, right? 1 to very unlikely, but the impact is high is 5. So we can get the risk severity number. Okay, so just like that, we have, or you might be having categories of risk, right? Risk 1, like here it can be a theft risk, right? So you have some number. First of all, why you are assigning that number, you can always take reference to this table, right? So and then you will see the here, probability, the assigned value to the probability, right? And then you can have assigned value to the impact, and here you will multiply both the probability multiply by impact, and you will get a number. This is a risk severity number, right? The same concept can be extended if we want to include the third dimension called detectability, right? So you can again define detectability also in a very similar terms like this. We can have detectability here, right? So how we define detectability, like I was able to detect this risky event, say 1 month in advance. If 1 month in advance, that means I still have good time, it's positive. So is its impact, one can say 1. However, if I can detect, like maybe 20 days before, yeah, then I can say 20 days before. Or I can detect, let's say 15 days before, like or maybe on the it's a zero, like just on the at the time of risky event realization, right? Or maybe it can be negative. So one can assign this numbers, similar numbers to them, and then you can multiply 3, right, to generate the risk severity score in a similar fashion. So once we will have here different categories of risk, like let's say 20 categories of risk. For each risk, one can have this 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions to determine the risk severity number. So that would help us to know that which risk is really having more severity number, and this has to be addressed by proper risk mitigation strategy. So these are the one or two methods, like how we can assess the risk.